All right, welcome back. This is going to be our introduction to ingesting data into our GridDB server. So by this, I mean ingesting legacy data. So this will be data that's already in CSV form or some other form factor. So we found this data set online on Kaggle, made by Gary A. Stafford. It's an IoT sample kind of data set. So he created this for free use for everybody to use. And it's about 7 megabytes of zip data or 60 megabytes of unzipped data. And the reason why we chose it is because it's an IoT data set. So it has 3 IoT devices nested in here, right? So you can see there are 3 devices. There's one that's this serial code, B8. There's a 00, and then there's a 1C. This is a good time to explain again the GridDB data model versus the traditional SQL data model. So, of course, this person, Gary A. Stafford, he is using just a regular SQL database. So all the devices are just under one column, and they all share just one big table, right? When we ingest this into our GridDB server, what we will try to do is parse out each device name and create their own table. So that way we'll end up with 3 tables. So we'll have one table for this container, one table for this device, one table for this device, and one table for this device. And right now I'm using table and container interchangeably. So let's download this data and go back to our GridDB server and ingest this. So as mentioned, this is the API version. So API means using Java or whatever language you prefer. And this one I'm going to use Node.js because I wanted to showcase different languages throughout the course just so you can see that they're not that different. It's just depending on preference in your environment and what your project needs. Okay, so I've already got this downloaded in this directory here. You see I got this CSV file. So I will open this up and we can just take a quick look. So as you can see, it's not different from what we see here. The thing is, the top first row is the column names, and then there's a line break, and then it's one row of data, and then a line break. So it's a typical CSV file. Basically, any CSV file that you want to ingest into your database will be the same. Okay. So now let's use Node.js to ingest this. So I already have a script ready. But before you use Node.js, there's 2 prereqs. You need the C client, you need the GridDB C client, and you need the Node.js client. C client for GridDB came packaged with the installer on apt. So this is my Ubuntu machine. So if you've been following along, you also installed GridDB using the apt repository. And if you installed the meta package, it should have the C client with it. So all we need really is the Node.js package. So luckily there is one on NPM, the Node package manager already. So let's just get started. So right now I'm going to use the latest Node.js, which I use NVM, but obviously you don't have to do that. And then let's try to init this so that I can have my package JSON file in here. So now I got the package JSON. So now I do npm install GridDB Node API. I believe this is the name. So now if we go to Node modules, you'll see that there's a GridDB Node API and the Node add-on API. So if you go into the GridDB Node API, you can see there's a GridDB Node file. So now we should be able to use GridDB with Node.js. Okay, there's sample code, but we don't have to run through that. All right, so next let's look at the ingest script. Oops. All right, oops. Okay, first and foremost, you need to import the package you're going to use. This is in any language you use, you're going to have to import the GridDB portion into your code. So here, the GridDB variable will have all the GridDB library stuff in it. We're also going to be using CSV parse, so actually I need to install that. Well, hopefully I know what it's called, because otherwise I'm going to have to pause the video and figure that out. CSV parse. Okay, let's assume that's correct. All right, so let's go back into our package, or sorry, our script. Okay, then next up is we have to put in our GridDB credentials. So I think all this should be familiar to you already. So I'll just skip ahead. So the next big thing is the container name list. So in the data set, the names are these kind of funky looking serial number type things. Two issues with this. One is GridDB will not allow colons in the container name. And two, it's a sample data set, so we don't really need to be super technical and have these very rigorous, unique names. So we just opted to change it to device 1, device 2, and device 3. Okay, in forming our ultimate data set that will be pushed into our GridDB container, I'm setting this up here. I made a global variable called all-data. And it's an object, and each object, or sorry, the object will have 3 keys, device 1, device 2, and device 3, and then each of those keys will have a value that will be an array, and then inside that array will be all the rows that we wish to push in. So it might seem kind of confusing, but maybe as I walk through it, you'll see how it goes. Okay, next up is, so we made this a function. The create container is a function because since there's 3 containers we're going to be creating and pushing to, obviously it makes more sense to make it a function, and that way we can do it in one go. So it's a time series container, and so to create this, I basically just looked at the, sorry, I'm going to be switching back and forth here, but I basically just looked at this file type, and I kind of just decided from there what it would be. So this is a time series data set. So this is a timestamp, as you can see here. So this is going to be our row key, and this is going to be of timestamp. So sorry, I'm switching back. I set it to TS, which is a name in the data set, and I gave it a type of timestamp. And then I also set row key to true and the container type to time series. Okay. And then I kind of just did that for the rest. So device I stripped out because it's going to be our container name. And then I kind of just figured out the rest. Like for this is obviously a Boolean, and for these are doubles or floats. Okay. So I just used doubles here because some of them are kind of big, and I just wanted it to be consistent. It doesn't matter that much for this demo use case. Okay. Moving on here. Next up is our data streamer. So here I have created a function that will read in via a read stream. So this is a file system. It's going to read in the data, which is in the same directory as our script. So I put in the data name here, the file name here, and it'll read all the data one by one. And columns I put true because the top line was just a row of column names. Okay, so when this stream receives data, it'll parse each row, and then for each row it'll run whatever function we have in between the curly braces. So here I put in basically I'm grabbing all the relevant data and assigning it to the proper variable. So here TS is I got a parse float for row TS, so this just tells me the row called with the column name TS, so it'll basically go row by row. So first row it feeds in, and then it'll read this first. This is row TS, and then it's a float because you can see it's 1 point and then etc. So Node.js / JavaScript doesn't have a parse double. It's all just going to be floats. So we're just using parse float. So now this TS is a float, and then we convert it to a JavaScript date object, and that way we can push it into GridDB as a timestamp. And then we kind of just go from there. So the device name is the device name. Here I'm stripping out the colons, and then from there I'm converting the B8 to device 1 and 00 to device 2, etc. Okay, and then the rest of the values are also getting the same treatment. So CO is getting parsed to a float. The ones that are booleans are being parsed with JSON parse. So false as a string is going to turn into false as a boolean. And then once we get that, we put everything in order. So it has to be in order based on this chart, or more based on how you set up this container here. But it makes more sense to match it just so you don't get confused. So now our R has all the relevant rows, all the relevant data for one row of data that we want to put in. So now, using our all data variable object that we created earlier, we're pushing directly to the device name that specific row of data. So now every 10,000 or so, basically I'm sorry, let me back up a bit. So I created a variable up here called I equals 1. So every time this streaming data reads a row of data, it'll increment I. So every time this goes through, this all data object is grabbing all the data that we are giving it here per CSV row. So for example, here you can see all data with device name. So device 3, for example, let's say, it'll push all that data into device 3, all data. So now you can imagine there's a big object with 3 arrays inside the object, and each array has a bunch of rows that we pushed in row by row by row by row, following the script. And then eventually, once we hit 10,000, it'll log to the console what I we're on, and then it'll run this function, sample multiput, okay? And then we'll empty out those arrays, and then we'll start over again, I, until the CSV is exhausted of data. And then when it's done, it'll say, okay, successfully processed, and it'll show us how many rows of data we ingested. And then earlier you saw this sample multiput function. It's simply this. Sample multiput function is just a function that uses the GridDB API called multiput. So multiput allows you to put multiple, not just rows, or multiple containers at the same time. So that's why we have to build out this all data object. This object will house 10,000 rows total, split amongst these 3 devices. And when it hits 10,000, we'll run this, and we'll use the GridDB store to multiput all of that data directly into our database, and then we'll go over again until the CSV is exhausted, and then this will run. And then this last part is just how we get started. This is the function runner, I guess. So before anything happens, we run, we drop the containers if they exist, and then we create the container names, device 1, device 2, device 3, with the schema posted above. And then parse CSV is, yeah, as you guessed, this parsing of CSV data. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So of course this code will be available to you. Normally, if you're just pushing to one container, it's not usually this complicated. This just got a little more complicated because of the extra devices we're parsing out of the CSV, but even still, I don't think it's that complicated. Okay, so let's try to run this. So I guess I must have written something. Okay. So to run this, it should hopefully work. I'll just do node. Well, let me clear this. So we just do node ingest. So here we can see we're creating 3 devices, or 3 containers, device 1, device 2, device 3. And every 10,000 rows, we are pushing that data directly into our GridDB database. And then at the end here, once we successfully parse through the entirety of the CSV file, we push in the remaining dangling rows. So this only goes every 10,000 rows, but it's obviously not an exact number of, let's say 500,000 rows. So whatever's left over, we push at the end when we finish up our function, and there we go. So pretty simple. Everything seems to be good to go. The next thing we can do is we can check the GridDB shell, the CLI tool, and we can make sure that our data is actually in there. So normally you can just run a search container. This will show you all the containers within your GridDB database. Here we have device 1, device 2, and device 3. And then next we can do a show container. So this will show the schema, compression method, type, stuff like that. So here we have all the relevant data. We can see the schema. We can see the row key is a timestamp. And then the last thing we can do is we can query it. So we'll just select all from device 2. Now here we can see we have 101,815 rows. Ingested pretty fast considering how much volume of data there was. But that's all. So thanks for watching. Have a good one.